glad to have you join us on Money Matters. I am Folashade Ogrinde. The year 2021 has indeed been an interesting one, especially on the economic front. While the government rallied around to bring down the inflation rate, it was saddled with the responsibility of ensuring quick recovery from the effects of global economic meltdowns in 2020. This year, Nigeria's economy has recorded some wins and losses, but how far can the nation grow in 2022? To discuss Nigeria's economic performance in 2021 and outlook for 2022, I'm joined now by the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Now, in terms of recovery, especially if you factor in the effects of COVID-19 in 2020, how well would you rate the nation's economic recovery progress?
Well, the recovery has been fairly okay because we have recorded positive GDP growth in the last 4 quarters. This year, for instance, first quarter we recorded 0.5% GDP growth. Second quarter we recorded 5% GDP growth. Third quarter we recorded 4% GDP growth. Certainly this is not bad, even though there is a major component of base effect in this growth, but generally I think it's a reflection of the fact that the economy is on recovery path. It's also a reflection of the fact that we are beginning to see the resumption and growth of economic activities across all sectors. It's also a reflection of the fact that we are beginning to cope better with the consequences of the pandemic. We have also witnessed that some of the sectors that were under complete lockdown in 2020, many of them have come alive now. A lot of activities now taking place in the entertainment industry, in the hospitality industry, the transportation sector, the aviation sector. So all of these things put together, I think, had brought about the kind of growth trajectory that we have seen, not only domestically, even internationally. And on the external sector, we have seen a very impressive recovery of oil price. Being an oil producing country, the oil price performance is also a critical variable in the recovery of the economy. So for most part of this year, we have seen oil price at least averaging around $65 per barrel. As we speak now, it's already moving close to 80 again. So that again has also impacted positively on the economy in 2021. It has impacted our level of foreign reserves, also the capacity of the CBN to intervene or to support the foreign exchange market has been strengthened as a result of the performance of crude oil price. So generally, I think it has been fair comparatively, especially when we relate it to the benchmark of what happened in 2020.
So now let's talk about inflation rates. Why have we not seen a major reduction in inflation numbers, and what degree of effect has this had on Nigeria's economic progress?
Well, there are two major variables that kind of devastated the economy in 2021. The first is inflation. The inflationary pressure was very devastating. It had a major impact on the welfare of the citizens. It aggravated the poverty of the citizens. It eroded purchasing power, and it increased the misery level of the citizens. Even though we have seen a deceleration in inflation rates from January up till now, we got to a peak of 18% around March. And between March and November, we have seen a gradual deceleration. But even then, the inflation remains elevated, because the last figure we had was for November. And November headline inflation was 15.4%, which is still very high. But even more disturbing is food inflation and the basket of products that the common people normally buy. If you look at it critically and you isolate the demand for the goods that the common people consume, you'll be looking at an inflation of over 50%, because some prices have actually doubled, especially basic items like food items, like medications, some chemical products, and so on. So the effect has been very, very severe on citizens' welfare. It has also adversely impacted on businesses. It has led to, an sharp increase in the cost of production, sharp increases in operating costs, erosion of profit margins. It has affected the mortality of some businesses. It has affected shareholder value in many businesses. So the impact has been very severe. Another devastating variable that we'll experience in 2021 has to do with the exchange rate. The exchange rate depreciation was very, very sharp. It was very significant. As I speak to you, we are talking about an exchange rate of about 570 or 575 naira to the dollar. And because of the high import dependence of this economy, either from the business point of view or even the consumer point of view, the shock on the economy was very profound. And some of the challenges we had with inflation, we could also ascribe to the depreciation in the exchange rate. So that was also a major factor. And on top of the depreciation challenge, we had a liquidity problem in the foreign exchange market. Many manufacturers, investors could not access foreign exchange from the foreign exchange market, especially the official window. That created a major challenge in terms of manufacturing capacity utilization, in terms of even for service sector. Many investors could not access foreign exchange to the level that they require to run their businesses. So this also took a major toll on the economy. Then we had the challenge of the volatility of the exchange rate. It created a lot of uncertainty. It made it very difficult for businesses to plan, because we are not sure of what the exchange rate will be the following day. It was as bad as that. So it has a major macroeconomic impact on the economy and on businesses and on welfare in 2021. Then, of course, we have the security challenges, which was also a major factor that impacted the economy, especially the rate sector of the economy, agric and agro-allied products. Many farmers could not go to their farms. Many of them are in IDP camps. So that also impacted inflation. It also impacted the linkage, the relationship between the industry and the agricultural sector, because a lot of agro-allied industries depend on these agro products to feed their factories. So that supply chain was severely disrupted in 2021. So those were the major issues. And of course, we had issues around the ports. The port situation affected international trade significantly. Whether we are talking about imports or we are talking about exports, the crisis at the ports, the traffic gridlock in and out of the ports, the documentation challenges within the ports, the issues of extortion within the ports, the issue of congestion and all of that. So all those issues combined made international trade very, very difficult and very, very costly in 2021.
Now, Dr. Muda, you've given a very comprehensive view of issues that went wrong, of things that went wrong in 2021. But you also made mention of a very critical issue, which is that of rising food inflation. You also made mention of the fact that security, or insecurity rather, had greatly affected, farmers on their farms and trying to cultivate this farm produce. But going into 2022 now, do you not think these issues might continue, especially as we've not really seen a major progress in curbing insecurity, especially when it comes to food inflation? For years now, we've seen a steady increase in the price of food items. Do you think this will continue in 2022?
Well, Quite a number of these things are likely to continue in 2022 because there is nothing on the horizon to give us that level of comfort that we are already on top of the security challenges. Nothing on the horizon to give us comfort that we're already on top of the structural challenges around infrastructure. But generally talking about the outlook for 2022, some areas of comfort that we can point out has to do with the oil price. The prognosis or the projections are that oil price will remain at a fairly comfortable level, possibly over 65 averagely for 2022. Again, because of the significance of crude oil to this economy, that it will give some comfort in terms of foreign exchange earnings and in terms of even foreign reserves, liquidity, and even investment in the oil and gas sector. We're also likely to see, on the back of the recovery of the economy generally, a higher energy demand, which again is good for the oil and gas sector. And we are likely to see less impact of the pandemic because the capacity to manage the pandemic is increasing globally. We are not likely to see the kind of complete lockdown that we experienced in 2020. So generally, many economies around the world are also reluctant to impose a prolonged lockdown. So to that extent, we are likely to see a more vibrant economic activities globally. If that happens, then of course that will impact positively on the supply chains. It will also impact positively on commodity prices. Then the service sector is also likely to continue to lead the way in the Nigerian economy. In the GDP report of Q3 of 2021, we saw that the the service sector accounted for 50% of our GDP. That trend is also likely to continue because the service sector seems to be performing much better than the real sector of the economy, because the challenges bedeviling the real sector are not so impactful on the service sector, particularly the issue of infrastructure. The infrastructure demands of the service sector is not as heavy as infrastructure demand in manufacturing or in agriculture. So to that extent, it is easier for the service sector to thrive, and that is what we have seen in the last couple of years. In Q3 GDP, the service sector grew by over 8%, whereas agricultural sector grew by 1.2%, whereas industries, contracted in Q3. So the service sector will continue to lead the way in terms of growth and possibly employment generation in the economy. But we are likely to continue to deal with the problem of insecurity in the economy. That is likely to continue in 2022. 2022 is also coming with a lot of electioneering activities because the elections will take place in 2023. So a lot of electioneering activities will take place in 2022. Therefore, we expect there's some very serious distraction away from the economy into politics, especially by the political office holders.
Well, indeed, Dr.
Then, of
Hoda,
course, we
we'll
had
still
some
delve
issues
properly
of
into the year 2022 and what it might bring along in terms of economic prospects. But let's talk about a very important issue, which is trade deficits, which currently stands at 26.5% as at the third quarter of this year. What really are the issues, and why have we not been able to get a good trade balance?
Well, issues of trade deficit is a function of export and imports. If you have an economy that imports more than it exports, you have the challenge of trade deficit. So that is what is playing out in the figures that we have seen. We had a trade deficit of about 3 trillion in Q3, going by the trade figures that we have. And this is a reflection of the fact that we remain very weak in terms of exports, particularly non-oil exports. That remains a major challenge. If you look at our export baskets, crude oil and gas still accounts for about 95% of our export earnings. So that speaks to the fact that even though the non-oil sector of the economy accounts for close to 90% of GDP, it is contributing almost nothing significant to exports. And that's a reflection of the competitiveness and productivity challenges that we have in the non-oil sector of the economy. So that, I think, is what we need to address. We need to address issues of productivity in the non-oil sector, issues around the structural problems around the infrastructure, particularly energy costs, transportation, logistics, our ports, and all of that. We also need to address the issues of policy, issues of foreign exchange to attract a lot more investment, then the general inflationary situation to ensure that we have macroeconomic stability. We need to scale up issues of use of technology, especially in agriculture, in order to increase productivity and efficiency in the agricultural sector. So if we're able to do all of that, we'll be able to connect a lot more to the global value chain. If we're able to connect to the global value chain, then we are likely to gain a lot more traction in the export market, particularly regional market, African market, and global market. So I think that is what we need to do. We need to do a lot more to scale up competitiveness of the non-oil sector of the economy.
Well, Dr. Muda, it's been a very pleasant first half conversation and a very detailed one, I must say. But we'll take a break here, and when we return, we'll discuss other key economic parameters in 2022. Oh, stay with us.
Corruption not in my country.
Hello? Yeah, I found your wallet in front of a supermarket. Meet me at Apple Junction. Yes, I'll be waiting for you.
Now we find out. Two of us.
Thank you very much, officer. You know, it's surprising that men like you still exist in the police force.
Yes, so...
Oh, yes.
This is just a token of my appreciation.
Oh, no. You don't need to do this. We are only doing our job.
Thank you very much. God bless you.
You're welcome.
Now I know police is really my friend.
Yes.
Friend. Hey. Which came out with this one? I don't understand.
You know your problem. You are greedy. I'm a policeman who is doing his job. All forms of corruption in the force. Not in my country.
Corruption not in my country.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, I've been discussing some of the key economic indicators in 2021 and prospect for 2022 with Dr. Muda Yusuf. Thank you so much for standing by. Now, a major win for the economy in 2021, I would say, is a growth in gross domestic product for 4 consecutive quarters. Now, could you briefly tell us what factors helped drive this?
Well, what happened was that we saw the increased recovery in economic activities. Remember, we were able to exit recession in Q4 2020. Narrowly, of course, and between then and for most part of 2021, a lot of the economy, a lot of sectors that were badly affected by the COVID pandemic in 2020, quite a number of those sectors came alive. We saw a relaxation of movements. We saw reduction in the disruption in supply chains. We saw the recovery of global oil prices and all of that. The global economy also improved. Demand for energy increased. So those were the things that led to, and of course, we had also what we call the base effect in the GDP computation, because we are comparing activities in 2021 when things were beginning to normalize with activities during a recession, when the economy was practically shut down. So those were the things that are reflected. It was more of the normalization of economic activities and the fact that we had a recovery trajectory in the economy. Those were the things that are reflected in the growth numbers that we saw in 2021.
Now, before I let you go, Dr. Muda, this conversation is incomplete if you don't talk about the full deregulation of the oil sector come 2022. Nigeria will pay more for petrol. Now, I know we've had some conversations around this in the past, but for how soon do you think Nigerians will begin to enjoy the benefits of scrapping fuel subsidy?
Well, for many Nigerians, scrapping the fuel subsidy is not likely to bring benefits. That is the perception of the average Nigerian. The perception is that it will bring a lot of pain and all of that. But the way things are, I'm not sure whether we'll be able to pull through with the deregulation of the downstream sector in 2022. First, 2023 is the election year, and the removal of subsidy in 2022 may come with very high political cost. And already we have a very serious pushback from Labour. We are likely to see some resistance even from the ruling party, the APC itself, because of the implication for the 2023 elections. It remains to be seen, but what can give us comfort as far as the deregulation is concerned is if we are able to bring to alive or bring into production the Dangote refinery. If you have some domestic production from Dangote refinery, or if we're able to revitalize some of the domestic refineries that is owned by the NNPC, then that may make it easy. But if those two things don't happen, it may be very difficult for us to effect the deregulation of the downstream sector in 2022, especially because of the inherent political costs to the ruling party.
So just in closing now, let's talk about 2022. What prospects do you see for the country? Are we going to see an economic growth? Is there going to be a decline? What exactly do you foresee for 2022, especially in terms of economic growth or otherwise?
Well, the outlook is largely very positive, especially if you look at some of the key drivers like the oil price. The projection is that oil price will remain at a reasonably higher level than even the budget benchmark, which is positive for us. Secondly is the fact that the shock of the pandemic on the domestic economy is not likely to be as profound as it used to be, even if you have new variants of the pandemic. Thirdly is the fact that the global economy is now better able to manage the pandemic. Even though in some countries we are still seeing some lockdowns and all of that, but the effect is not likely to be as severe as we had with the previous variants of the pandemic. So to that extent, if you have a fairly active recovery in the global economy, if there is no major disruption in the domestic economy, if the external sector as reflected in oil price remains positive, then generally I think we are likely to see a fairly good year. Of course, there are risks to the economy. The risks include the insecurity, which we are not sure whether we'll be able to overcome that completely in 2022. There are issues around policy, especially foreign exchange policy. There are issues around some regulatory issues in the economy and all of that. So even with those risks, I think we expect that the economy will perform fairly well in 2022.
Well, it's this much we can take, but Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, Dr. Muda Yusuf, thank you very much for your contributions in the program.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Well, it's a wrap on the program. Do join me next time. I'm Folashade Ogrinde. Bye for now.